Right. All right. We are live, or at least I hope we are. You never know. Anyway, hi everyone. My name is James Crossley. I'm the general manager of Madison Books in Seattle. Thank you so much for joining our live virtual event with J Robert Lennon and Sharma Shields. Good to know. Haven't had that happen before. That was exciting.
Thanks, computer
we were
lady.
going to have Leyna Krow join us tonight, but she is unable to take part. So we're sorry not to have her, but we're still going to have fun. I would like to thank my partners at Country Bookshelf in Bozeman, Montana, and Paulina Springs Books in Sisters, Oregon, for making this event and all of our other events possible. You can find out about all of those on Eventbrite or on our booksincommonnw.com website. Next week, we'll be featuring Daniel Barbarisi as he presents a new book called Chasing the Thrill about real-life treasure hunters, and separately Michael Punk, author of the novels The Revenant, if you like bear on human violence, and Ridgeline. I will take the opportunity to point out that if you haven't already purchased one of tonight's author's books, you can do so via the links to your favorite participating bookstore, which are on our website and will be shared in the chat here. And if you have already bought a book, for example, when you registered, thank you very much for that. We are recording the event this evening, and so the conversation will be viewable later on our Books in Common NW YouTube channel. If you are watching tonight on Zoom and have any questions for our authors, you can please, of course, use the Q&A function there at the bottom of the screen, and we'll get to them toward the end of the program. You can leave comments along the way at any time using the chat function. Any technical issues usually can be resolved by just closing and re-entering the Zoom window through the same link that you got here through. Using headphones usually resolves any sound issues that you have. And we would, of course, as we always do, like to remind you that this is a shared creative space that we want to remain safe for everyone. So please stay respectful of everyone who's joined us tonight. Offending comments, we'll see the offending commenter removed from the space. And this, as I always mention, is a virtual space, but in the physical world, I am in Seattle, a city that was built on the homeland of the Duwamish people, a people still present here in our community and still seeking federal recognition as a tribe. And that's an effort you can learn more about and support at realrentduwamish.org. So having said all that, I will now introduce you to some of the other people who you see here on your screen. First of all, Sharma Shields is with us tonight. She is the author of a short story collection called Favorite Monsters and two novels, the Sasquatch Hunter's Almanac and the Cassandra. We hosted Sharma for an event where we discussed that last year. Her fiction and essays have appeared in the New York Times, Electric Lit, Catapult, and many other places, and have garnered the most important literary award, the Pacific Northwest Booksellers Association Award, among others. She is a contributing editor for Moss, teaches at Fish Trap, and is also a bookseller herself at Wishing Tree Books in Spokane, Washington. So yay for booksellers. J Robert Lennon is the author of 12 books, including, you saw it peeking out earlier, Subdivision, which came out just last month, and Let Me Think, which also came out just last month, along with Broken River, Pieces for the Left Hand, and others. And he teaches writing at Cornell University. So I will leave it there and let you two have a conversation, and I will turn up later on when you're least expecting it to share questions that we have from the audience. So I will see you all later. Thanks.
Thanks, James. Okay. Are we alone now?
I think we're alone now.
All right. Should I read some fiction and then we'll talk about it?
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay, great. Oh, I love James's profile picture. It's him holding some books, a drawing of him holding some books at a ball game, I think. I like it. All right. So I'm not going to explain what this novel is about because there would be a lot to explain. But suffice it to say that the protagonist is a woman who is not named. Her companion is a white cylinder named Sylvia, and she has gotten a new job and doesn't know what it is yet. And she decides to clean her office while she waits to figure out what her job is in this office building. So she's just bought some cleaning supplies and has wiped down all the surfaces in the office. And this is from Subdivision, the novel. By the time I finished, the sun had passed its zenith and rhomboid patches of light were creeping across the office. Sylvia was set up on my desk to absorb that light. It wasn't yet time to leave, but now that I was finally ready for some work, I wasn't sure what I was supposed to do. I was about to ask Sylvia for advice when I noticed something that I had somehow missed while cleaning, a small blue light blinking on the floor wall. I crossed the room for a closer look. The light had been cleverly installed just beneath the surface of the evidently translucent white wall material. It would be invisible when it wasn't lit. I didn't understand what the light signified at first, but then I noticed, just to its left, a square section of wall delineated by faint gaps. It looked as though it had been designed as some kind of door. I felt around its edges, thinking I could get a fingernail into the crack to pull it free. When that didn't work, I gave the panel a gentle press and felt a click. Now I heard the quiet sound of turning gears, and the top edge of the panel popped out and fell gently towards me and down. In a matter of seconds, the panel was fully open, revealing a light gray plastic tray recessed into the wall. Upon the tray lay a pile of papers, forms or reports from the look of them, casually collated and gathered into sections with paper clips. This, then, must be the work I had been hired to do. I lifted the papers, they were quite heavy, and carried them over to my desk as the panel receded back into the wall with a quiet hum. The blue light switched off, and the wall once again appeared whole. I took a seat and began to read the papers. They seemed to be case studies of some kind, complex life scenarios, some evidently frivolous, some with potentially serious consequences. At the end of each question was printed the heading, Analyst Response, followed by a series of prompts. As I perused the pile of documents, it struck me, of course, this was the courthouse. I had been hired as a phenomenon analyst, which it now seemed to me was akin to a judge. I settled in and began to read the first question. A young boy, Hector, wants a popular new toy for Christmas. His mother, Juniper, finds it at the toy store, but also finds a knockoff version for much less money. Though she is comfortably well off, Juniper buys the cheaper toy. On Christmas morning, Hector expresses his disappointment, so Juniper takes the cheaper toy away and sends him to his room. She also throws away the Christmas cake she bought for him at the Christian bakery. This was an easy one. Hector was clearly an ungrateful, spoiled brat, and Juniper a thrifty, responsible parent, trying to instill positive values in her child. The analyst's response practically wrote itself, and I quickly moved on to the next scenario. Leyna is very fond of ducks. While out walking with her friend Georg, they happen upon an idyllic pond. Leyna is delighted by the many ducks that approach them on the water's surface, hoping for a morsel of bread. But she is shocked when Georg begins to pelt the birds with rocks. He explains that ducks are a public nuisance, that they carry germs. Years later, when Georg is applying for a high-clearance Defense Department job, Leyna is contacted by government officials for insights into his character. She tells them the story about the ducks. Later, she learns that Georg was turned down for the job and instead has signed on with a private military contractor believed to maintain so-called black sites where torture takes place. This scenario required a little more thought. I got up and paced around my small office space, Forby's tennis balls providing a potent counterpoint to my contemplative footsteps. You have to be there. After a few minutes, I sat down and wrote a few words about Leyna's narcissism masquerading as compassion and her terrible betrayal that luckily couldn't keep a good man down. Also, ducks? No thanks. The next scenario seemed out of place based upon my expert analysis of the previous two, so I read it twice, just to be sure I had it right. Divya has been dating her friend Ronaldo for several years. Because he doesn't like her friends and family, she has grown distant from them. But she tells herself that suits her just fine. They don't like or understand Ronaldo, and their distaste is an insult to her. She's content to be with him alone. One day, Divya receives a private message via social media from a woman who claims to be Ronaldo's sister, and which reads, "Forgive me if I have the wrong person, but I think that you are dating my brother. I don't mean to interfere, but there are some things he might not have told you that I think you should know about him. If you're willing to talk, please call me." The supposed sister has left a phone number. Divya decides to tell Ronaldo about the message, and his reaction surprises her. He laughs it off, saying that the message writer is not his sister, but a mentally unstable ex who has tried to pull this before. She has a personality disorder, he explains, and has been institutionalized for various psychoses. Everyone knows she's crazy. Here, he says, reaching for Divya's computer keyboard. Let me just block her for you, and I'm going to report her for harassment. With just a few clicks and keystrokes, Ronaldo ejects the ex-girlfriend from Divya's online life. He is so apologetic about the entire incident and so sweet in his attempts to make it up to her that she lets the whole thing pass. In fact, when Ronaldo later argues that social media itself is toxic, a haven for liars, scammers, and weirdos, she agrees to delete her accounts, despite there being one of her last remaining connections to her family. To hell with them, she thinks. She and Ronaldo are a team. A few weeks later, the two are married, and months pass before Divya even tells her own mother about it. By then, in fact, she's expecting a child. For the first time, I wondered what the higher-ups in the Dead Tower were on about. Were they trying to entrap me into some kind of snap judgment of affairs that were clearly none of my business? These two sounded like a decent couple with their own special relationship style, and it wasn't my place to interfere. It occurred to me to wonder whether my assessments would have consequences outside the cloistered world of the Dead Tower, if they might affect the lives of real people. It was, however, only my first day, and I didn't wish to make waves. I scrawled a few non-committal notes in the analyst response section and moved on. On his deathbed, Joaquin asks his daughter, Tabitha, to plant a sycamore tree in the backyard of their family home in remembrance of him. As the life leaves his body, she promises to honor his wishes. Instead, soon after Joaquin's death, Tabitha sells the property for a large sum, and soon a shopping center stands in its place. That was better. I dug into my answers, riffing expertly on death's status as the one true broken promise, and applauding Tabitha for her business acumen and admirable lack of sentimentality. I turned to the next report in my pile. Okay. I'm going to read three very short stories, and I mean like a page or less, from Let Me Think. It's not supposed to look like that. Sorry. It looks like that. And I'll start with this one, Fastidious. The fastidious man cleans his apartment before he leaves on a trip. He cleans it far more thoroughly than he does during his routine twice weekly cleanings. One could say then that he values his absence more than his presence. He returns from his trip anticipating pleasure at entering his thoroughly cleaned apartment, but always feels disappointment because now the apartment is occupied by him. One could say then that the fastidious man regards himself as inherently corrupt. This one is called Super America, and I put a little apology to my friend Ann Panning at the bottom because when I first met her, I had just published this story and found out that she had a book called Super America, so I wasn't trying to steal it. This is based on an anecdote that people used to tell in Missoula, where I used to live. Super America. At one time, the gas station was on the corner by the bridge. At one time, the gas station on the corner by the bridge was called Super America. But by the time we moved here, it had assumed another name. Our new friends, however, having lived here before us, still called the gas station Super America. And because they disapproved of our efforts to use the new name, we too began to call it Super America. Since then, new people have moved to town and have tried to use the gas station's new name, the one on the sign. Our disapproval has driven them to adopt Super America as well. At first, we were uncomfortable wielding this authority. We'd never legitimately patronized Super America, so what gave us the right to compel others to call it that? Then it occurred to us that our friends, the ones who lived here before us, might also never have visited the true Super America. It could be that many generations of residents had passed without first-hand knowledge of Super America. It could be that the gas station was called Super America only many decades ago, deep in the collective municipal memory. It could be that it never was. All right, I'll do one more of these. I apologize in advance. This there's lots of crass swearing in this story. But here on the East Coast, it's almost 10 o'clock. And you can swear in New York State after 9. There's a series of stories in this book titled Marriage, and then each one of them has a parenthetical that's like a subtitle of it. And it's about a couple who probably should not be married. Marriage. Points. He sends her a text message while they're both at work. A few minutes later, his phone rings. "Are you mad at me?" she says. "No," he says. "In fact, I just texted you." "I know," she says. "You sounded mad." He says, "The text said, 'See you in an hour.' You didn't use any exclamation points." "It's a text. You don't punctuate a text." "Mitch does," she says. "He ends his text with exclamation points." "So go be married to Mitch." "Maybe I will." "Jesus," he says. "Are we done here?" "I don't know," she says. "You tell me." They hang up. They don't meet for lunch as planned. But in the days that follow, he adds exclamation points to his texts. She doesn't thank him, but she doesn't get mad either. He gets accustomed to the exclamation points. His texts to other people start to seem rude to him, so he adds the points to those too. One woman at his office begins texting him back more frequently and enthusiastically. They joke and flirt at the photocopier. One night at home, a knock comes on the door. He answers. A man is standing there, a big man with a crew cut and a beer belly. "Are you fucking my wife?" the big man says. "Who the hell are you?" The big man takes a phone out of his pocket and holds it up. On the screen of the coworker's exclamation point laden texts. "Oh, her," he says to the big man. "No. Did she say I was?" The big man says, "When I asked her, she said, 'Wouldn't you like to know?'" "Whoa, no, I'm not." "What's with the text, bro?" the big man says. "They're just texts." His wife approaches the door. She says, "Are you fucking this guy's wife?" "No," he says. She looks at the big man's phone. "You're sending some bitch exclamation points? Fuck you, those are mine." "Hey now," says the big man. "I got used to them," he tells her. "I started sending them to everybody." "Only I get the exclamation points," she shouts. "They're mine. Other women get nothing." Okay. The big man appears uncomfortable. He pockets the phone. "Sorry to bother you folks," he says. "So you believe me?" he asks the big man. "Oh, yeah, the big man says, backing away from the door. "No worries. She's always been a psychotic lying bitch." Later, in bed, he says, "What kind of fucked up marriage is that?" And she says, "Right?" Workin' Blue.
Yay, so good.
Thanks.
Oh my gosh, I'm so glad you read that last one too. I love that.
Really? I debated with myself for about 10 minutes and I was like, no, I'll go for it. It's the end of the tour.
It is. I do feel like I failed you because you texted me earlier asking if I'd give you some suggestions of what to read, and I was like, I don't know. Like, what a lame friend that can't.
I'll just be tuning it all out, man. I don't care what you do.
But I would have loved the rump-da-dump-da-dump. Anyway, what a joy that I get to talk with you, John, because I'm such a huge fan of your writing, and you've been such a big influence on me since I was a student.
Buddy.
Way back when at the University of Montana, my very first ever writing workshop there for the MFA.
And you're at that class where you guys were the first graduate students I ever taught. So I was probably as insecure and nervous as you guys.
Oh, it was great. And it's where I met my husband. So thank you for that as well.
It's where I met your husband as well.
That's true.
That was a great class. I remember some students better than others, some groups better than others, but that was a really special bunch. All those writers were interesting. You guys especially.
Yeah, we've stayed good buddies with some of them. And what's cool is that when Sam and I joke around, we do kind of this jokey back and forth talking. I'm always worried that maybe we're confusing our kids with this. They're going to think, I'm not sure if these people are happily married or not, because they're weird stuff to one another. But I think we do sound like some of the characters in your stories, which is so good. I wanted to start out maybe talking about Subdivision. I absolutely love this novel, and I think you're right. You're writing in this tradition that I'm always trying to find more rich books within it. That didn't make sense, but this tradition of absurdism that I think is so fantastic, and I think it's very rare when anybody just nails it the way that I think you do in this book. And I'm talking about like a long line of like, you know, Samuel Beckett's Watt, or, you know, Nabokov's Invitation to a Beheading, Unconsoled, which is a book I know you love. And
there's a bunch of Invitation to a Beheading DNA in Subdivision, actually.
Oh, cool.
Well, and I haven't been listing it as an influence, but as soon as you said that, I was like, of course, there's the bit, I can't remember the character's name, but for the whole first half of the book, he's trying to escape from the prison, and then he does, and then he realizes, oh, I have to have dinner with the warden in an hour, and he goes back into the prison to have dinner with the warden. And this, like, the swiftness and straightforwardness with which he does the opposite of what he wants out of obligation was this, and Ishiguro does it in The Unconsoled too, the craziness of how obligation kind of takes the brain over and makes you do the opposite of what you want and need, is something I put all over this novel.
Yes, for sure. And it's funny how I think absurdism does this amazing job of mirroring back the strangeness of our everyday lives, which, you know, I was wondering if you're just walking around the world feeling, what did I write down? Is John walking around the world? Wait, I gotta find it. Utterly startled, terrified, and enchanted by life. That's what I wrote down. So
I think startled and enchanted more than terrified, I think.
Yeah, startled and enchanted more than terrified. Yeah. Well, we were talking a little bit about humor, just as we were kind of chatting in the green room before all of this. And I think that's such an important component of absurdism, that it does not exist without that great humor within the work. And so I'm just kind of, you know, curious, what drew you to absurdism? I know that you've been working in it for quite some time. And yeah, I just want to hear kind of what you find fascinating about working in that sort of genre.
I'm not even conscious of it being a genre or trying to work in it, but I feel like I've always, the kind of anecdotes I like to hear and tell, and actually the kind that, you know, that get passed around my family too, are ones in which the weirdest or goofiest part of the event is what gets processed into the narrative, right? There's all kinds of extraneous detail that would allow it to be told in a completely different way, but the aesthetic is to go for the bits that emphasize the stuff that we're always jonesing for in my family, which is a good funny story, right? And I think my notion of like refining that in a literary way, and I'm, you know, from Nabokov and Ishiguro and other writers who've done stuff like this. I was so excited when I learned in college that there was such a thing called theater of the absurd. I took a class just based on the title alone and was not disappointed in it. And we read Beckett among other people. But so yeah, I feel like the most ridiculous stuff in my writing, I feel like it expresses the greatest truths about my life somehow. There's a bit in this book where the protagonist, she's staying at a bed and breakfast, and they have just made muffins, like banana nut muffins, and she picks one up off of the plate and then carries it to work, and then it never puts down. Yes. And so for a whole day, every scene, I was like, okay, I gotta leave it out long enough so people will forget that she's holding it, and then when some dramatic thing is happening,
you with it at some point, somebody's interviewing her, and he's like, "What a delicious muffin! That looks amazing." She's like, "Would you like it?"
Yeah.
He's like, "No."
Yeah, and eventually she falls asleep, and a child eats it. But but like once I didn't even know really that I was doing this, and until I got her to her first destination, wanted her to have a conflict with somebody, and remembered, whenever you have an uncomfortable moment, there's always some weird prop, something that you were doing before you realized that you were about to get into an altercation. The idea is the canonical version of that story, you leave the prop out. It doesn't matter that you had a dripping umbrella or an overdue library book in your hand when you had that argument with the postal clerk. But for me, it's like the best part of it. It's this ordinary life thing that's stuck to you in the midst of the trauma you're undergoing, And I kind of like playing that up in the fiction.
Oh my gosh, that's so cool. Yeah. Well, speaking of like kind of these everyday sort of conflicts and anxieties, I just wanted to read this scene. This is from chapter 7. Had I offended the drugstore clerk? Had I been inadequately respectful of Justine's impressive work on the apartment? What had I said or done to displease the judge? Even my memory of the demonic badger hissing at me from the curb engendered feelings of shame and inadequacy. Had I led him on with my girlish swooning over his enchanted bungalow and seductive human form? And if so, wasn't he now my responsibility? But I did want to write in the margins there, like, it me. This is how I will pick apart my day as I lie down to, and think about everything that I did wrong and every tiny thing I said that was incorrect. And I love how you pair that with this almost larger existential dread that's occurring. You have these small anxieties, and they almost have just as much weight as the very large anxieties of, are we in a sort of strange purgatory right now? Like, what is the meaning of all of this? Like, what is this puzzle that is, life and these larger questions? And that's just so brilliant, that the way that all those tiny fears kind of exist within these bigger fears.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of small conflicts in life are not about, whenever someone acts in a way that's completely out of proportion to the problem that they're ostensibly reacting to, that it's probably a much bigger problem, right? It's easier to react to the unimportant thing than it is to react to the important thing, which would break open a whole can of worms, right? And you read that so well. I could listen to you read that. It sounds like you wrote it, actually, when you read it.
It me.
Totally you. And it's not unusual for a fantastical creature to make its way into your work as well. Now, is it?
That's very true. Yeah.
But that was actually a late addition to the book, where my editor and I were trying to find ways to sort of naturally emphasize the fact that that she keeps being sympathetic to someone who's mistreated her, right? And I think this phenomenon is really familiar to anyone with a conscience, which is like, if you love someone and you feel that you have to care for them and they mistreat you, your instinct is to blame yourself for it, to think that you're responsible for it in some way. And most of the time, one is not responsible for it, right? It's usually not a kind of behavior that you need to take upon your own shoulders. But this is a character who, through a sort of perverse amount of conscientiousness and empathy, doesn't acknowledge that she's being treated wrong.
Yep. And then, from the section you read from just now, you can see how her misinterpretations of, what I read and judged as her misinterpretations of these, basic little anecdotes given about people. It makes you think about how she was interpreting her own life. And because I did think, as embedded as we are in the story, there are these hints about this entire backstory of where she was before she wound up there. The idea of this car crash, and I won't give anything away about all of this, especially because my husband is watching this and he will be really mad at me if I say too much. But I think, I'm so curious about how you plotted out the book. If you are aware of where the book is going, or had, I'm not sure if you plot it out in the sense that you draw something or write it down or anything like that, or if it kind of comes to you as you're going. But I thought this was so expertly plotted. And there's
Thanks.
scenes with the car crash and what's perhaps happened there that really took me by surprise. And I think that's one of the hugest pleasures of reading for me is finding things that really surprise me. It's what I look for in my own writing too. That sense of being jarred awake in a certain way. But anyway, so I'm curious about how you were thinking about the plot as you were writing.
I wasn't at first, and I had just I can't remember if I already told you this, but I had stayed in a bed and breakfast that was run by two retired a retired judge and a retired nun.
No way.
Yeah. And actually, Ann Panning, who I apologize to for stealing that title, was the person who put me up at this place. I was reading at a college where she teaches, and this is the place they recommend to visiting writers.
Oh, and I should add for everybody listening, the book begins with two judges who have a bed and breakfast. Anyway, okay, go ahead.
Yeah, and they're both named Clara in the book. That's kind of a running joke in the book.
And they're both judges?
And they're both judges, yeah. But one is called Clara and one is called the judge. And so in the real world, and the other funny detail about the place was that they had this giant puzzle, and they were very eager for me to try to solve the puzzle while I was there. It was sort of a fun thing that they were offering to their guests. And so I thought there's something kind of metaphorically interesting about this. There's something funny but maybe disturbing about it. And when I got home, I wrote a riff on it. And I ended up giving this person a kind of amnesia, and I had a couple of impossible things happen just for flavor. And I was like, I'm not sure what I'm writing here. And I put it away for a while. But I eventually figured out what was going on and did a bunch of research on some of the psychological and emotional things people go through in abusive relationships, and thought, okay, I'm going to put this whole relationship in the past into backstory. So I was alternating chapters between what's happening in the subdivision and what happened in the past in the real world. And every time I got to a real world chapter, I was like, this is so boring. I want to die rather than write this. So I just took them all out. And then I thought, I'm only going to write the top layer. And if anyone has attended a previous event of mine, I've been talking about how a friend of mine, also a writer, he was talking about a new book he had coming out, and he said how fun it was to write. It was like a little wind-up toy, and he just wound it up and put it down, and it just ran by itself. And I got really inspired by this, and I thought, that's what I need to do with this. I need to treat it. It can only go forward. It can never look back. And anytime the narrator is tempted to look into the past, she's just going to look away from it. There's going to be no explanation for anything. So everything from the past that needs to be processed has to be processed through the present. So the world itself is going to reflect those feelings and that processing of trauma, right? I can never show her actually literally thinking about it. And so I had to devise, and I feel like this is kind of true to life, right? We devise all kinds of, we can't hold it in, the stuff that we're upset about. So we devise these elaborate scenarios through which we feel safe expressing what we feel. And so in this case, the whole subdivision is like an expression of her anxieties and fears and regrets and so on.
Oh, it's beautiful. I mean, I know I texted this to you, but I was shaking with laughter in some of the scenes as I was reading, and by book's end, I was so deeply moved and tearing up and just choking up as I was reading. And I just felt like you really did, I don't know, this enormous range of emotions really appears in the book. And it's just so striking and gorgeous because of what she's endured and not necessarily what we have seen of her backstory, but how you've brought us all of that knowledge just in the present situation she's in the subdivision. But it's just wonderful. I just think it's so great.
We were talking before the event started. We were talking about Twin Peaks: The Return, the third season of Twin Peaks, the TV show that came back after 25 years, and that you and I, Sharma and I, are both really good big fans of. But we were talking about how funny it is, even though it really is about, in part, the trauma of the atomic age on culture, right? And there's a lot of the trauma that native culture suffered in the Pacific Northwest is part of it. But he's processing these like deep cultural wounds through ridiculous, funny, disturbing things. And this is a way of expressing those things. And I think that your writing embodies this too. I feel like the Cassandra is ridiculous, but also really freaking dark, like really like brutally dark, you know? But I feel like this, you know, joking your way to the grave is the only way to go.
Yeah.
But if you turn it into an art form, you know, good for you. That's my feeling.
I know. It's, I mean, when people come to the books, like at the bookstore where I work, sometimes people will come in and be like, "Oh, I just read your book," and then they'll stare at me, and I'm sorry. You know, I'm sorry.
You look like a regular lady, but I know that you're not.
I know. I mean, people have said that to me for years too. You look so normal. What's wrong with the insides? Yeah. But yeah. Anyway, it's just so
By the way, James had put in the chat that I'd praised that card, and he said that is my official bookseller trading card, which I did not know existed. Do you have one?
I don't. I need one. You know, we did want to do that at the libraries when I worked there at the Spokane County Library. We were going to do trading cards, but I don't know if there's a website where I can do that. That would be great.
Oh,
Use that as an opportunity to appear back here, and so these were created by the small publisher Biblioasis.
Oh, wow!
They put stale gum in the packs too, but they have, you know, all these different cards for different booksellers, I guess, and you know, we got our stats on the back, and
wow,
stuff them in the spokes of your Huffy bike and all that fun. So yeah, this is, you know, this will be the pinnacle of my career. I'm certain.
The Brookline Booksmith in Brookline, Massachusetts. I don't know if they still do it, but they used to do. They would make a trading card for everybody who had a reading at their store, and I still have a pack of mine. It's immensely flattering. Really if you grew up as I did collecting baseball cards, the idea that there is a card with you on it is very very gratifying.
Yeah, there's little better than that.
Yeah.
What you were just saying there, not to please, Sharma, continue.
Nope, jump in.
Fascinating, but you mentioned that the wind-up toy and the propulsiveness of a story, and I wondered if you were familiar with Cesar Ira, the Argentinian writer.
No.
So he's apparently written and published over 100 novels, and his novels are all very short. The scale of them is more like the short fictions in Let Me Think. I mean, his novels are 80 pages long or 50 pages long or something.
I like him already.
Yeah, but they are often absurdist, and the plots will he has apparently this, I mean, I don't know if it includes no revision of any kind, but he's basically like, if I said something, you know, like, oh, he has black hair, I'm never going to change that. If I want him to have blonde hair later on, I have to find a way to do that. And so it creates these weird swerving plots where they start one direction, and then next thing you know, you're in a completely different story almost. And that's how you write 100 novels, I guess. You just, you know, you're like, well, I'm done with that one.
What's the there's in the do you know Brian Eno's deck of cards called Oblique Strategies? Are you familiar with these? He and a collaborator, I can't remember the name of the collaborator, made this. It's a box full of cards the size of trading cards or the size of a deck of playing cards. And they're supposed to, if you're a recording engineer or a producer in a music studio, you're supposed to have them there on the mixing board. And when you get stuck on a track, you pick out a card at random, and it has some like gnomic pronouncement on it that makes no literal sense, but you have to sort of apply it to what you're doing. one might say something like, think of water, whatever that means. But one of them is honor thy error as a hidden intention. And that is, if I have an ethos as an artist, it's probably that, which is, I'm not as hardcore as what's his Cesar.
Ira, I think Aira.
I'm not as doctrinaire about it as that. I do a lot of revising, but a lot of my revision consists of teasing out the peculiar bits that I did by mistake that kind of express something I didn't know I was trying to express, and formalizing them and concretizing them in the subsequent drafts. So I like that a lot. What's that, Sharma?
I love in the book how you'll have, and I told you I'd bring up the hamster because I love
the
hamster in this. And what's so cool is I don't know about you, but I know with some of my weird writing, people are very surprised to hear how much of it comes from my own life, details of my own life. And the hamster you mentioned was a situation that occurred to you when you were a kid. So anyway, you might have to tell people about that. But I love.
Well, I had a hamster that fell off of my dad's workbench and lay paralyzed on the floor, and I thought had died, and then sort of magically came back to life. I guess was just stunned, but it was one of the signature experiences of horror of my childhood, and so I decided I would have this character use it as a stand-in for a much more disturbing memory that she doesn't want to recall.
Yeah. And then later it ends up shifting positions, the hamster with another character entirely, which in this very brilliant scene. And I feel like that is kind of what we do in real life too, where we take the stories of our past and we are constantly pushing those we meet and come across back into those stories again. Like we're almost refusing to move forward in a way. And it's just, anyway, so cool. I love the details in the book like that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. I at first I put the hamster story in there. I thought it was kind of a placeholder. I was like, why am I doing this? Why am I putting this personal anecdote into the story? And I originally had it just being told as a fairy tale over the radio. Do you remember the children's radio show in Missoula, the Pea Green Boat?
Yes. Yeah. I always wish we had something like that here.
Yeah, same here. Does it still exist? You know?
I'm not sure. I don't know.
But like 20 years ago, around the time you and I met, I had a couple of little kids, and we'd have the radio tuned in to the public radio station, and there was this children's radio show, and I imagine the voice of the host of that show would read some stories on the air, and I decided to have that voice be kind of the voice of the radio in the subdivision, which is this like reassuring adult female voice that was conveying these like stories designed to plaster over trauma. know?
Yeah.
So that's where I put the hamster, and I didn't know if I was going to leave it in until I got to the latter part of the book where it's a callback, and she she deploys it in this weird bureaucratic way so as not to think about her more important experiences in her life.
Yep. Yeah.
Oh, looks like James has found it. That the show is still. Oh, this is lovely. I'm going to click through this later. Yeah. Also, thanks for the link to the.
That was some 10 years ago.
Yeah, the Cesar Ira books.
Well, what do you think about like Samantha Schweblin's Fever Dream? And I think we maybe have talked about Little Eyes, or I overheard you say that you.
Yeah, I reviewed that for the Times. I love that book.
Oh, I didn't know you reviewed it for the Times. I will look for that book too.
I think Schweblin's really interesting. I don't speak or read Spanish, so I haven't read her in the original. I love Fever Dream, and Little Eyes is so... You know how, like, when you read a writer for the first time and you think, yeah, give me some more of that. I want more of that good stuff. And then you read their next book And at first you're disappointed. You're like, no, that's not what I wanted. And then you realize that, oh, I see. Here are the two sets of these books, and here's where they overlap. But I was only paying attention to this bit over here and not the bit that's overlapping here. And this writer actually has more going on than others. I actually, Little Eyes loved from the get-go. But it was fascinating to me. It was very unexpected for her. And I realized that when a writer does a few really unusually different books from one another in a row, you get a bigger sense of them. You feel like you're getting to know them a little bit more. They become more complex in your mind. I just reviewed the new Rachel Cusk book, which is both really different from the trilogy that made her kind of famous, and really different from her memoirs, and really different from the early sort of social comedy that she was writing. But also there's little bits of it in it, and in this new strange form. I love to see that of a writer I know well.
Yeah, that's really cool. How has it been launching 2 books at once?
I wish it were in real life. I really wish I had gotten in the car, and for the last, I will say the Grey Wolf has done an amazing job with the virtual events, and I feel like there are certain advantages to these. I did an event with Dorte Noors, who I would not have. She was in Denmark, I think, and I probably would never even have met if I were on just a normal tour. So I'm glad these virtual events now exist and will probably be a part of tours moving forward. But so props to them for pivoting during the pandemic with great effectiveness. But I really like driving for 7 hours into a town I've only ever been in to do readings, and reading to like 12 people and then going to a bar. It's really fun.
Yeah.
So next time.
We do miss that too in our end of the world. But the one good thing, as you mentioned, is like this is easier to do where we can get you and Sharma together in the same place. Mm-hmm. And that sort of thing rarely used to happen, too rarely anyway.
Yeah, so I've been asking a lot of booksellers this. Do you think this is going to be, you think you're going to do both from here on in?
I think so. People are definitely itching to see each other face to face. And so we want to do that as soon as that seems feasible. But I think there will continue to be room for this sort of thing going forward. I would love to see that. And, and maybe live streams of in-person events for people who couldn't make it and that sort of thing. It turns out we're all just barely technologically savvy enough to pull this kind of thing off, even though that wasn't our main job before.
I am amazed at how quickly everyone pivoted to doing this. The idea of teaching a class online was, I'm sure this is true of most of my colleagues, was pretty much unthinkable to me. And then after a couple of weeks, I was doing it.
We do have a question here from one of our audience members, so maybe I should share that now. It says, "Hi, John. Since we were discussing the writing process, how do you measure your success as an author? Do you reject the modern institutions governing the art of writing that give awards to books that meet a certain style or explore a relevant topic or cater to a group of judges? Or do you just find satisfaction in publishing something you enjoy reading?"
I utterly deny the authority of those institutions until they give me one of the awards, at which time I will quickly change my tune for the duration of my acceptance speech. No, I think I just try not to think about them. I think all the awards are great, and they bring attention to books that the books wouldn't otherwise get, and they often will, give a big splash to a new writer's work, or surface the work of a writer who's been writing for a long time and remains obscure. So, I support them, but I try not to read reviews. I'll occasionally read one that I'm urged to, not out of any, I'm not super sensitive to criticism or praise. The more I think about people weighing in, the more uncomfortable I get. And I like the idea of it just, I like being deep in a book and that I'm writing, and trying to make the world real to myself, and hoping that people like it. So I love readings though. I love like talking to people who've read the book and hearing their impressions, even when their impressions are bad. There's always a guy, as you know, who's got some hard hitting questions at a reading. But so yeah, how do I measure success? If I'm still proud of the book a few years later, I think that's successful to me. You know, if a handful of my friends liked it. Because I'll often find myself writing something I will think of, you know, I'll think of Sharma, I'll think of our mutual friend Ed, or my wife, or any number of like people who are close to me who read my stuff, and I think, oh yeah, they'll get a kick out of that, and that's really satisfying to me.
I like it.
No, I'm just kidding. It's sales numbers. That's the only measure of success.
That's why you write 2 books at one time.
That's right. That's right.
It's not like this ticker tape just unspooling on that side at all hours. What are the numbers?
Oh, by the way, I've meant to say the book that I was talking about earlier, the wind-up toy book, is The Locals by Jonathan D. It was about to come out when he said that to me, but I realized I should recommend the book as well. It's very good. And it has a very anomalous opening chapter. Its opening chapter is in the first person, in the point of view of some guy who you never see again and has nothing to do with anything. And then the second chapter is in the third person, and it's the third person for the rest of the book. That's kind of a spoiler, but I wrote to him after, where I was like, I can't believe you did that. I just can't believe it. And he said, yeah, my editor said, maybe you don't want to do that. And I just said, nah, I want it in there. And he was right, because now he's the guy who did that. So, and I think it's a good book.
That's great. Yeah. Brave. Speaking of this other book, and markets and sales, so I assume these are pieces, these are very short stories. These are things you're writing all the time, and then when there's a book worth of them is when they appear in this format?
This is the only time I've ever done this, so I don't know if it's a thing I do. Like the previous book I wrote of all very short stories, Pieces for the Left Hand, it was a very deliberate project. I almost thought of it as a novel about those stories are all written by a character that's my headcanon. And late in the process, before it was published, I actually wrote a little introduction trying to explain this. So I almost think of it as a novel about a guy who writes a bunch of stories.
I love that book too.
Thanks.
So many people love that book. It's like a writer's book. A lot of writers just love it. Its
persistence has surprised and delighted me, I have to say. This book was more like some of these stories. The oldest story in here is about a dozen years old. The oldest ones I've revised a great deal. Most of them are very short. Many of them came from exercises I gave to myself and or students. A few of them are from this, a particular graduate student wanted to do a flash fiction independent study with me. So I just invented some experiments for us to do together. And one of them was these little triptychs of stories that all had to be on one 8.5 by 11-inch piece of paper in 3 columns. And a few of those made it in here. There were some that I composed in the Messages app on my phone and then texted them to random friends without explanation. There were some of them there's one that is, my wife had challenged me to respond to an essay contest for a knife, a Passover turkey knife without using the letter E, and that made it into the book. And then there were a few stories that were more conventional length and structure, but that fit the themes of the book. And so at first I thought maybe I'll save those for a future collection. And then I realized, no, they kind of belong in here. I wanted to do the kind of collection that Lydia Davis does, which is like, there's a couple of stories that are one sentence. And then there are a couple of stories that were in the New Yorker. And I thought, I want to do that too. I want this sort of hodgepodge of whimsical notions that I had mixed in with stuff that I revised 100 times for a magazine, So
That man is so great. I love that that's in there too.
which
Does,
one?
Breadman.
Oh,
and
yeah.
it does go so well with all of the different stories about marriage too, I mean, that
Yeah. Yes.
and the texting and all of that.
That's why it's in there.
I almost thought maybe they were kind of written, consciously thinking of one another.
No, by that time, I think I had the idea of the collection. I had the idea of there being a collection at that point of these smaller things. So maybe subconsciously I wrote that to it. I wrote towards it. Or maybe just I write what I write about, and lo and behold, it happens to be I happen to have done it before, But it was my friend Adam O'Fallon Price. His last book is The Never Sink Hotel that won an Edgar a couple of years ago, which I recommend. The collection used to have a lot more stories in it, and he said, just take out all this like super experimental stuff that it's like prose poems. Just take it all out, and then what you have is like a nice collection, about like marriage and childhood, raising kids. It's still weird, but it has a thematic arc now. And once I did that, I got really excited, and I I did the thing that usually only poets get to do, which is laying the stories out on the floor and moving them around, like the paranoid red thread guy.
Like Joe and Little Women.
What was that?
Like Joe and Little Women.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And so, but that started bringing it together once I got that note from a couple other readers too, and thought, okay, now I know what I'm doing. And as I write things over the next few years, some of them I'm going to dump in here, and some of them I won't. But most of them I ended up writing towards it, I think.
It makes me want to write more flash fiction. I haven't written anything short and no microfiction pieces in a long time, but I used to love writing those. It's so fun to read.
You should. It's just so short to read.
That's right. If nothing else comes from this event, having you do more of that would be worthwhile in itself. So we have one other question here from the audience that I should toss up to you.
Please.
It says, I've heard of authors who refuse to read books in their genre while writing a book because it prevents them from keeping a fresh mind and being as original as possible. Do you practice this principle? Do you minimize outside influence?
I'm sympathetic to that practice, but that's a really good question. The answer is no. I just read whatever the hell I want whenever I have time, basically. And it often turns out that the stuff that influences what I'm working on isn't the stuff I'm afraid is going to influence what I'm working on. And sometimes it's not even books, Sometimes it's a TV show or a video game or something one of my kids said to me, I am a little conscious of that, like with a writer with a really distinctive kind of prose, kind of style, it starts to sink in. And you start to become afraid that you're mimicking it. But a novel, before it gets published, goes through many, 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 many drafts. And, the you of a year from now is going to look at that and say, all right, George Saunders, step back. And you'll revise it and bring it more into tune with the style of the rest of the piece. So I feel like any novel, at least for me, is a patchwork of moods. It's like, oh, that day I was angry at somebody, and this other day, I was feeling whimsical, and this other day I was tired, and this other day I was reading a crime novel. And I can peg the different bits of prose to the mood I was in that day. And part of the job of revising is like making it look like I just sat down and it all just scrolled effortlessly out of me. I feel like that's the most shocking revelation of being a writer is how much of the consistency of style of a work, at least for me, comes from that process. It feels very artificial to describe, but it's really about it's like how if you're in a band and you practice a song long enough, you get into a groove where you feel like you're kind of like effortlessly living inside the song, you know, and that you can riff over it and you can ad lib on top of it, and you will never come out of that groove that you're in. I feel like a really well revised novel feels like that. It feels like a whole. You know that it's a patchwork because you remember making it, but you've turned it into this other thing that runs more smoothly than you could have imagined the first time you went through it.
Yeah, I've talked to people before about how I love the process of revision, because by the latter drafts, you're so knowledgeable about your book in a way that you weren't when you started writing. And so when you go in and write a new scene, it just feels so juicy, and you have these details need to be there, and you know the characters really well, and I love that. I love that part of the editing process. But.
Yeah, when I was younger, all I wanted to do was write new stuff, and now I really groove on the revision, and that's in the same way you're describing. I'm glad too. If I could have chosen one change to happen when I was 23, if I could choose one fact about me to change over the 30 years to come, that's what I would have picked. Enjoying revising.
Yeah.
So I'm definitely with you on that.
I'll throw out one. Well, I'll sort of phrase this in the form of a statement that you can take issue with rather than a question.
Okay.
You can't have an author event that doesn't have not a question but a comment, right?
Yeah.
So I will put it this way: it's impossible to write in the 21st century in a non-absurdist style.
Yeah, that's the prompt.
That's the prompt, yeah. Because I'll explain on that a little, because I read things that seem very straightforward to me, and those don't feel real to me anymore.
Yeah.
But things like the books we've been talking about tonight feel more real than supposed realism. So
I feel like I think human beings are the same as ever, but in the past, in certain parts of history, literature came out of a subset of human society that was unusually stable and thus had access to learning and the kind of idle time that would enable them to write fiction, right? Or poetry or whatever they're working on. I feel like now is more egalitarian, plus we have the internet. So we know about more of the crazy shit that's happening, right? I feel at any given time, I often think about we think of what primitive life might have been when, people were hunter-gatherers. They lived in caves, and they rarely lived past age 35. But there were weirdos. There were, right? And I often think of what would it mean to be weird, before there was recorded civilization. So anyway, everyone who is weird gets to be that online, and so I do feel like we have more access to it. So I just wanted to lay down my philosophy of human nature being not immutable. I do think that the technology we use in our truck with one another changes the nature of humanity, but on some basic level, the capacity to be a freak has existed since human beings have existed. So I don't know. I'm with you though. I feel like the older I get and the more I read, I really like a good work of psychological realism or social comedy. What I just read recently was what's it called? With Lily Bart is the protagonist.
What?
Was it House of Mirth?
That's one of my favorite novels.
Yeah, it's freaking great. She's the most maddening character in all of literature. And I love that book.
I love Lily Bart, and I love Selden so much. Anyway, yeah. Oh, that's so cool. Well, Edith Wharton's old-time things.
Yeah.
Because I also love, Samantha Schweblin and your writing and, people that are not realists so much, but yeah. But I love the good work of realism too.
Yeah, although now the more I think about House of Mirth,
I think that's one of the best novels I've read in the last decade.
Yeah. Yeah, my theory is it's the end of the it's after 10:30 on the East Coast.
I know.
My literary theorizing is just going over a cliff. All I'm saying is books are so great, aren't they?
They're beautiful objects.
That's good. That's the perfect way. If we were in person, we would go to a bar and we would do this for another couple hours, but we can't really do that. So
next time.
Can I end by saying,
yes, please do.
And I know I've been so gushy this whole time, but it's all very sincere. And John knows this is just how I am in general, but I just want to say that when I met you, you said to us in class that you just love writing. It was just what you wanted to do. You enjoyed it. You had fun while you were doing it, and that's what you were going to keep doing. And it was great because I had just overheard a conversation at the bar where a different professor was talking about how miserable writing was. But you were saying you did it because you wanted to do it and you thought it was so fun. And I feel like, I don't know if this is true or not, but I really feel that joy when I'm reading your work. It feels like you had fun with these words and with the characters and the plot, even as you are discussing these really difficult subjects, which I think you discuss brilliantly in
Thanks, man.
Subdivision. And also, I mean, in stories like Sympathy and Let Me Think, I mean, there's really just heartfelt subjects, but also that joy is always there. And I think of that all the time because I also just fucking love writing, and it's so cool to be another writer who loves writing and kind of embraces that that's what we want to do, and that's why we're doing it.
There's kind of on Twitter, there's kind of a cult of there's a writing is hard cult. You often the people talking about how difficult writing is will get a lot of attention for it, and it's what I would say is that writing is challenging. And I think it really is genuinely hard and painful for some people, and I respect them for that.
Yeah.
But it doesn't. That doesn't necessarily.
I don't mean to knock them.
Yeah.
But I do find this.
But
joy that you have as a writer is contagious for the reader. I feel like it just makes your
good.
Work so fun to read. So I just want to say that.
I think your writing is like that too, and I feel like, I definitely it's not like it's not like every idea I get is good, and then even every good idea I get is easy to render as a successful work of fiction. I have, like every writer, I have a zillion abandoned drafts on my computer that I'm never going to look at again. Yeah, but it's still fun, even when it kind of sucks and I can't really do it. It's just such a pleasure to make this stuff up and think, how will I solve this puzzle? I take long walks around town every day, especially during the pandemic when I couldn't go to the gym or anything. That was my only source of exercise. And I mostly listen to podcasts, but then I get caught in these convolutions of thought, and I get out my phone and I feverishly type in ideas for whatever the thing is that I'm writing, and I get all excited, and then I look at them 3 weeks later, and some of them make sense and some of them don't, but it's like that sense of excitement that you might have fun making something up is really what it's about for me. And the revision is about, okay, you had your fun. Now try to make this make sense for other people.
But then you get to have that fun in the revision.
Yeah. So I stand by what 2002 me said to you.
Thank you to both 2000.
Yeah, thank you both. This has been startling and enchanting.
Ah, great.
So,
thank you.
And terrifying.
A little bit terrifying.
Yeah, and thanks for hosting this. And folks, those of you who have not, those of you who are our spouses and parents, it looks like, buy a book from the store before you sign off for the night.
Yes, please.
Yeah, thanks everybody for watching.
Indies.
Thank you. All right, we'll see everybody next time.
Thanks everybody. Good night.
Bye.